A silver Honda Accord sat in a salvage yard for 15 years, minutes away from being crushed into scrap metal. Inside the trunk was a notebook that would solve a 16-year-old double murder and reveal that an elementary school teacher had been living a secret double life as an amateur detective. This is the story of how one woman's quest for justice got her and her 10-year-old son killed. Before we uncover what really happened that night, I need you to do three things. Hit that subscribe button right now. Smash that like button so this story reaches more people who care about justice. And turn on your notifications because Frozen Evidence Files brings you the cases that demand to be solved. Now, let's dive into one of Oregon's most haunting mysteries. The November rain tapped against the window of the modest ranch house in Eugene, Oregon. Each drop a metronome counting the years that had passed. Each one a reminder of time lost, of questions unanswered, of a family torn apart by circumstance and mystery. Daniel Wilson sat alone in the darkened living room. The only light came from the television screen flickering in the corner, casting shadows across his weathered face. His fingers gripped the armrest of the leather recliner with the kind of tension that comes from years of waiting. The same chair he had sat in 16 years ago when the phone call came that shattered his world into a million irreparable pieces. On the screen, the local news anchor's face appeared. Her expression was practiced and somber. The kind of look journalists perfect when delivering stories about tragedy and loss. Today marks 16 years since Margaret Wilson and her 10-year-old son Josh vanished during what should have been a routine drive home from a soccer tournament in Bend. Despite extensive searches and investigations, no trace of the mother and son has ever been found. The screen cut to a family photograph, one of those perfect moments captured in time, before everything fell apart. Margaret, radiant in a yellow sundress, her auburn hair catching the sunlight like spun copper. Josh beside her, gap-toothed grin wide beneath a mess of dark curls, clutching a worn soccer ball that had been his constant companion that entire summer. Behind them, their silver Honda Accord gleamed in the driveway, polished and ready for the journey that would be their last. Margaret Wilson was 32 years old, a beloved elementary school teacher at Willow Creek Elementary. Her son Josh was a fifth grader at Roosevelt Elementary. They were last seen leaving the Cascade Youth Soccer Complex in Bend on November 14, 2004. Their vehicle, a 2002 silver Honda Accord with Oregon license plate Kilo Juliet Romeo 489, has never been recovered. The anchor's voice took on that familiar plea, the one Daniel had heard dozens of times over the years. If you have any information about this case, please contact the Lane County Sheriff's Office. The family is offering a reward for information leading to answers. Daniel's jaw tightened as the segment continued. He had paid for this airtime himself. Every year on the anniversary, he made sure the story ran. Every year, he hoped that someone, somewhere, would see Margaret's face or Josh's smile and remember something. Anything. A detail they had forgotten. A moment that seemed insignificant at the time, but could break the case wide open. He clicked off the television before the segment ended. The silence that followed felt heavier than the rain outside. 16 years of this ritual. 16 years of paying the station to run the story. 16 years of waiting for a phone call that might never come. 16 years of living in limbo, caught between hope and despair, unable to move forward, but refusing to give up. His phone rang. The sudden sound was jarring in the quiet house, cutting through the silence like a blade. Daniel's heart rate accelerated immediately. Every unexpected phone call still carried the weight of possibility. Every ring could be the one that changed everything. He answered on the second ring. "Mr. Wilson, this is Detective Sarah Chen with the Lane County Sheriff's Office." There was a pause. Daniel recognized that pause. It was the kind of silence that preceded important news, the kind of breath a professional takes before delivering information that will alter someone's life. "Sir, we have received a call about a vehicle that might be connected to your wife and son's case. It was discovered at a salvage yard in Springfield this morning." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. His mind raced through possibilities, through scenarios he had imagined 1,000 times before. What kind of vehicle? A silver Honda Accord. The owner was preparing to crush it when he noticed the license plate matched one in our database. Another pause. This one longer. More weighted. "Mr. Wilson, we would like you to come down and see if you can identify it. Can we send a patrol car to pick you up?" Yes. The word came out as barely more than a whisper. Daniel's hands were shaking now. After 16 years, could this really be it? Could this be the break they had been waiting for? "We will have officers there in 20 minutes, Detective Chen said. Her voice was professional, but not unkind. "Sir, I want to prepare you. The vehicle has been exposed to the elements for a significant period of time. It may be difficult to see." "I understand," Daniel replied, though he did not really understand at all. How could anyone understand what it felt like to possibly be moments away from answers after 16 years of questions? He hung up the phone and sat motionless for several minutes, staring at the wall where photographs of Margaret and Josh hung in careful arrangement. Their wedding photo, Josh's first day of kindergarten, a family vacation to Cannon Beach, Margaret's last birthday before she disappeared. Each image a fragment of a life that had been violently interrupted. Daniel stood and walked to the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. Springfield was only a few miles away. The salvage yard was a place he had never thought to look, though the police had searched junkyards and impound lots in the initial investigation. How had the car ended up there? Where had it been for 16 years? And most importantly, what would it tell them about what happened that November night? The patrol car arrived exactly 20 minutes later, its lights off out of respect for Daniel's privacy. He grabbed his jacket and stepped out into the rain, locking the door behind him out of habit. The two officers in the car greeted him with respectful nods as he climbed into the back seat. Neither attempted small talk during the drive, for which Daniel was grateful. His mind was too full of possibilities and fears to engage in pleasantries. The salvage yard sat on the eastern edge of Springfield, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Rows of crushed cars stood stacked like metal coffins, their colors muted by rust and decay. A sign near the entrance read, "Riverside Auto Salvage, established 1978. The rain had turned the yard's dirt paths into mud, and puddles reflected the gray sky overhead. Detective Chen was waiting near the entrance. A trim woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and an air of competence. She approached the patrol car as Daniel emerged, extending her hand. "Mr. Wilson, thank you for coming so quickly. I know this must be difficult." Daniel shook her hand, noting the firmness of her grip. "Where is it?" "This way." She led him through the maze of wrecked vehicles, past cars that had been mangled in collisions, past trucks missing wheels and doors, past the remnants of lives interrupted by accidents and misfortune. Near the back of the yard, cordoned off with yellow crime scene tape, sat a silver Honda Accord. Even from a distance, Daniel recognized it. The shape was right. The model was correct. But 16 years of exposure had transformed it into something almost unrecognizable. The paint had faded and peeled. The windows were gone, leaving empty frames that stared like hollow eyes. Vegetation had grown up around the tires, which were flat and cracked. The hood was slightly crumpled, but not from any major impact. More like someone had leaned on it heavily or dropped something on it. Daniel approached slowly, his feet heavy in the mud. Detective Chen walked beside him, her presence a steadying force. "That is the right license plate," Daniel said, his voice hollow. "Kilo Juliet Romeo 489. I remember it. Josh used to make up mnemonics to remember it. King Josh Rules 489. Detective Chen pulled out a notebook and wrote down the detail. "That is very helpful, Mr. Wilson. Do you recognize anything else about the vehicle?" Daniel walked around the car slowly, taking in every detail. The passenger side mirror was missing. The rear bumper had a dent he remembered from when Margaret had backed into a pole at the grocery store parking lot 3 months before they disappeared. The inspection sticker on the windshield, though faded and peeling, showed an expiration date of October 2004. "It is theirs," he said finally. "This is Margaret's car. Where did you find it?" Detective Chen gestured toward a stocky man in coveralls standing near a small office building. "The owner of the salvage yard, Bill Hendricks, called it in. He says the car has been here for approximately 15 years. He acquired it at an auction of abandoned vehicles from a long-term parking lot." 15 years, Daniel repeated. "So it sat somewhere for a year after they disappeared. And then it has been here ever since?" "That appears to be the timeline. Yes. We are working to trace the exact path, but these things take time. Records from that far back can be incomplete." Daniel turned to look at Detective Chen directly. "Have you searched it? Is there anything inside?" The detective's expression became more guarded. "We have done a preliminary search. The vehicle is largely empty. There are some items in the trunk we would like you to look at, if you are up for it. But, Mr. Wilson, I need to be clear with you. We have found no human remains in or around the vehicle." Daniel was not sure if he felt relief or disappointment. Part of him had hoped for closure, even if that closure came in the worst possible form. Not knowing was its own special kind of torture. "Show me what you found." Detective Chen led him to the trunk, which stood open. A forensic technician in a white suit was carefully photographing the interior. Inside the trunk, laid out on a tarp, were several items that had been removed. A spare tire, rusted and flat. A jack that had corroded. A canvas bag with a faded soccer ball pattern. Daniel's knees nearly gave out. "That is Josh's equipment bag. He always kept it in the trunk so he would never forget it." The detective made another note. "Can you tell me what would typically be inside the bag?" "His shin guards, his cleats, an extra jersey, sometimes a water bottle." Daniel's voice cracked. He was so excited about that tournament. They had won their division. He scored 2 goals in the championship game. Detective Chen's expression softened slightly. "I am very sorry, Mr. Wilson. I know this must bring back difficult memories." "Do you mind if I look inside the bag?" Daniel asked. "Actually, we would prefer if you did not touch anything directly, but I can show you the contents." The detective pulled on latex gloves and carefully opened the bag. Inside were the items Daniel had described. The shin guards, still grass-stained. The cleats, child-sized. The laces frayed. An extra jersey with the number 7 on the back. And something else. A small notebook with a worn cover. "What is that?" Daniel asked, pointing to the notebook. "We are not sure yet. It appears to be some kind of journal. We will need to examine it more carefully back at the lab but it seems to contain handwritten notes. Do you recognize it? Daniel shook his head. I have never seen that before. Neither Margaret nor Josh mentioned keeping a journal. It may be nothing, Detective Chen said, carefully placing the items back in the bag. But we will investigate every lead. Mr. Wilson, I need to ask you some questions about the days leading up to their disappearance. I know you have been through this before, but sometimes with new evidence, old details take on new significance. Of course, Daniel said. Anything that might help. They moved to a small office inside the salvage yard, away from the rain and the mud. Bill Hendricks, the owner, brought them coffee without being asked, then discreetly left them alone. Detective Chen opened a thick file folder containing the original case documents. Let us start with November 14th, 2004. Can you walk me through that day from your perspective? Daniel closed his eyes, pulling up memories he had reviewed countless times. I was working that weekend. I am a civil engineer, and we had a project deadline. Margaret took Josh to the soccer tournament in Bend. It was about a 2.5-hour drive. They left Friday afternoon right after Josh got out of school. The tournament was all day Saturday and Sunday morning. They were supposed to drive back Sunday afternoon and be home by dinner time. What time did you last speak with them? Sunday morning, around 10 o'clock. Margaret called to tell me Josh's team had won the championship. She sent me a photo on my phone of Josh holding the trophy. He was so proud. Daniel's voice wavered. She said they were going to get lunch and then start driving home. She expected to be back around 6 or 6:30. And when they did not arrive, I started calling around 7. Her phone went straight to voicemail. I figured maybe the battery had died or they had hit traffic. By 8, I was worried. By 9, I called the police. They told me I had to wait 24 hours to file a missing persons report for an adult, but they would keep an eye out for the vehicle. That must have been frustrating, Detective Chen said. It was hell, Daniel replied bluntly. I drove the route myself that night. Interstate 97 to Highway 20, then Highway 126 to Eugene. I looked for any sign of them, any indication of an accident. Nothing. It was like they had driven into another dimension. The police conducted extensive searches along that route, correct? Yes. They searched for weeks. Helicopters, search dogs, volunteer teams. They checked every ravine, every turnout, every rest stop. The car seemed to have vanished. And there were no ATM withdrawals, no credit card charges, no cell phone activity after that last call. What about Margaret's state of mind in the weeks before the disappearance? Was she worried about anything? Any conflicts or concerns? Daniel had been asked this question many times before, and his answer had never changed. Margaret was happy. We were happy. No marital problems, no financial stress. She loved her job. Josh was doing well in school. There was no reason for her to run away or disappear voluntarily. And you can think of no one who would want to harm them? No. Margaret did not have enemies. She was a teacher. People loved her. And Josh was just a kid. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. I have gone over this 1,000,000 times in my head. I have looked for reasons, for explanations. Nothing makes sense. Detective Chen was quiet for a moment, studying the file. Mr. Wilson, I want to be honest with you. This case is going to take time. We need to process the vehicle thoroughly. We need to trace its history. We need to examine every piece of evidence we recover. It has been 16 years. DNA degrades. Fingerprints fade. But I promise you, we will do everything in our power to find answers. Do you think they are alive? The question burst from Daniel before he could stop it. The question he had been afraid to ask for 16 years. "Do you think there is any chance?" Detective Chen met his eyes directly. She did not look away or offer false hope. "I do not know, Mr. Wilson. I truly do not know. But I promise you this. We will find out what happened. One way or another, we will get you answers." Daniel nodded, not trusting himself to speak. After a moment, he asked, "What happens now?" "Now we work. We process the evidence. We interview the salvage yard owner again, and we trace the vehicle's history back to wherever it was before it came here. We examine that notebook. We look for any forensic evidence inside the car. And we hope we get lucky. How long will that take? Weeks, at minimum. Maybe months. These things cannot be rushed. But Mr. Wilson, I want you to call me anytime, day or night. If you think of anything, if you remember any detail, no matter how small, I want to know about it. Here is my card." She handed him a business card with her name and multiple phone numbers. Daniel tucked it carefully into his wallet, next to the worn photograph of Margaret and Josh he had carried for 16 years. If you are still watching at this point, drop a comment with "I am still here." Let's see who is truly following this shocking story, because what happens next will challenge everything we thought we knew about this case. The notebook Detective Chen found was about to reveal secrets that would turn the investigation in a completely unexpected direction. The rain had intensified by the time Daniel returned home. The patrol officers dropped him at his door with quiet condolences and promises that someone would keep him updated. He stood in his entryway for a long moment, dripping water onto the hardwood floor, staring at nothing. The house felt emptier than usual, more haunted. Every room held memories of Margaret and Josh. The kitchen, where Margaret had made Josh's favorite pancakes every Sunday morning. The living room where they had watched movies together. Josh's bedroom, which Daniel had left exactly as it was the day he disappeared. Soccer posters on the walls. Models of race cars on the shelves. A homework assignment still sitting on the desk, waiting to be completed. Daniel had become a ghost in his own life. For 16 years, he had existed in a state of suspended animation, unable to move forward but refusing to let go. He had taken a leave of absence from work that had eventually become permanent retirement. He had let friendships fade. He had turned down dates and dinner invitations. His entire existence had narrowed to a single focus: finding out what happened to his family. He changed into dry clothes and made himself a sandwich he did not eat. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table and opened his laptop. Over the years, he had created an extensive digital archive of the case. Every news article, every police report he could obtain, every tip that had been called in, every theory, no matter how unlikely. He had taught himself the basics of investigation, reading books on forensic science and criminal psychology. He had joined online forums for families of missing persons. He had become an expert on his own tragedy. Now he opened a new document and began typing everything he remembered from his visit to the salvage yard. The condition of the car, the items in the trunk, the notebook that neither Margaret nor Josh had mentioned. Every detail mattered. Every observation could be significant. His phone rang, startling him from his work. He glanced at the caller ID. Unknown number. He answered anyway. "Mr. Wilson? This is Bill Hendricks from Riverside Auto Salvage. We met earlier today." "Yes, I remember. Is everything all right?" There was a pause. "Look, I probably should not be calling you directly, but I figured you deserved to know. After you left, I got to thinking about that car. I have been running this place for 30 years, and something did not sit right with me. What do you mean? I went back through my records. Like I told the detective, I bought that Honda at an auction 15 years ago. It came from a long-term parking lot at a storage facility outside Bend, the kind of place people leave vehicles when they go on trips or deploy overseas. The lot owner auctions off abandoned vehicles after 2 years of unpaid fees. So Margaret and Josh's car sat in that parking lot for a year before it was auctioned? That is what the records say. But here is the thing. I found the original bill of sale, and it has the name of the person who left the car there. Daniel's heart began to race. Who? A woman named Patricia Lawson. Hendricks spelled out the name. Does that mean anything to you? Daniel wrote down the name, his hand shaking slightly. No, I have never heard of her. Did the police get this information? I called Detective Chen right after I called you. She is sending someone over to pick up all the paperwork. But I wanted you to know. Figured you have waited long enough. Thank you, Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you for calling. I hope it helps, Mr. Wilson. I really do. After they hung up, Daniel immediately searched for Patricia Lawson in Bend, Oregon. Several results came up on social media and public records databases. He began clicking through them, looking for any connection to Margaret or anyone they knew. Nothing obvious jumped out. No mutual friends on Facebook, no shared employment history, no apparent reason for this woman to have Margaret's car. He called Detective Chen, but it went to voicemail. He left a message explaining that Bill Hendricks had called and asking if she had any information about Patricia Lawson. Then he returned to his computer and continued searching. By midnight, he had filled several pages with notes, but had found no clear connection. Patricia Lawson appeared to be a real estate agent in Bend. She was 52 years old, divorced, with 2 adult children. Her social media presence was minimal but unremarkable. Photos of grandchildren. Shared articles about local events. Nothing that suggested involvement in a disappearance. Daniel finally forced himself to go to bed, though he knew sleep would be elusive. He lay in the dark, listening to the rain, thinking about the silver Honda Accord sitting in that salvage yard. After 16 years, it had finally surfaced. But would it provide answers, or just more questions? The next morning, Detective Chen called at 8 o'clock sharp. Mr. Wilson, I wanted to update you on our progress. We have located Patricia Lawson and will be interviewing her this afternoon. We also have preliminary results from the forensic examination of the vehicle. Daniel sat up in bed, fully alert, despite having slept only 3 hours. What did you find? First, the good news, if you can call it that. We found no evidence of foul play inside the vehicle, no blood, no signs of violence. The car appears to have been driven to the storage lot and parked there normally. And the notebook? That is more interesting. The notebook contains what appears to be a detailed log of someone's observations. Dates, times, locations, descriptions of people and vehicles. It reads almost like a surveillance log. Surveillance of what? That is what we are trying to determine. Some of the entries mention a gray pickup truck and a man in his 50s with a beard. There are references to Highway 20 and Mackenzie Pass. But there are no names, and the handwriting is difficult to read in places. Is it Margaret's handwriting? We do not know yet. We would like to get a sample of her handwriting to compare. Do you have anything we could use? An old letter or shopping list? Yes, I have several things. I can bring them to you this morning. That would be very helpful. Also, Mr. Wilson, when we interview Patricia Lawson, would you be willing to participate? Sometimes a victim's family member can observe the interview and provide context that helps us ask better questions. I would like that very much. They arranged to meet at the Lane County Sheriff's Office at 2 o'clock that afternoon. Daniel spent the morning gathering samples of Margaret's handwriting. He found old birthday cards she had written to him, grocery lists stuck to the refrigerator with magnets, notes she had left in Josh's lunchbox. Each item was a small knife to the heart, a reminder of the ordinary life they had shared before it all fell apart. He arrived at the sheriff's office 15 minutes early and was escorted to a small observation room adjacent to an interview room. Through a one-way mirror, he could see Detective Chen and her partner, Detective Mike Torres, preparing for the interview. A video camera was set up in the corner of the room. Patricia Lawson arrived precisely at 2 o'clock. She was a petite woman with short gray hair and a nervous energy about her. She wore a business suit and carried a large purse. Detective Chen greeted her politely and offered her coffee, which she declined. "Thank you for coming in, Mrs. Lawson," Detective Chen began. "As I explained on the phone, we are investigating a cold case involving a missing woman and her son from 2004. We believe you may have information that could help us." "I do not understand how I could possibly help," Patricia said, her voice tight with anxiety. "I have never even heard of these people." Detective Chen slid a photograph across the table. "This is Margaret Wilson and her son Josh. Do you recognize them?" Patricia studied the photo carefully, then shook her head. "No, I am sorry, but I have never seen them before. What about this vehicle?" Detective Chen showed her a photo of the Honda Accord, taken before it disappeared. "According to our records, you left this car at a storage facility in Bend in 2004. It was later auctioned when you failed to pay the storage fees." Patricia's face went pale. "That is impossible. I have never owned a Honda Accord. I have driven the same Toyota Camry for 15 years. Detective Torres leaned forward. "Mrs. Lawson, we have paperwork with your name and signature on it. The storage facility has records showing that you rented a space and left this vehicle there in December of 2004. Are you saying those documents are fraudulent?" "I am saying I never did any such thing." Patricia's voice rose slightly. "Look, I do not know what is going on here, but I did not leave any car at any storage facility. I would remember something like that. Do you mind if we take a look at your identification?" Detective Chen asked. Patricia pulled out her wallet and handed over her driver's license. Detective Chen examined it carefully, then pulled out a copy of the storage facility paperwork. Mr. Wilson, in the observation room, leaned closer to the window. "The signature on the storage facility documents does not match your driver's license signature," Detective Chen observed. "It is close, but not identical." "Of course it does not match," Patricia said, her voice sharp with frustration, "because I did not sign it. Someone must have used my identity." In the observation room, Daniel felt his stomach drop. Identity theft. That would explain how the car ended up at the storage facility under a false name. But it raised even more disturbing questions. Who had taken the car? Why had they used Patricia Lawson's identity? And what had happened to Margaret and Josh? "Mrs. Lawson," Detective Torres said, "can you tell us where you were in November and December of 2004? Patricia thought for a moment. "That was right after my divorce was finalized. I was living in Portland at the time, not Bend. I did not move to Bend until 2006. "Do you have any documentation that could verify that? Old lease agreements, utility bills, anything?" "Probably. I keep pretty good records. I can look when I get home." "One more question," Detective Chen said. "Have you ever been a victim of identity theft before?" Patricia's expression changed to one of realization. "Actually, yes. In 2004, someone tried to open a credit card in my name. I caught it and reported it to the police, but they never found who did it." Do you remember which police department you reported it to? Portland Police Bureau. I can probably find the case number if you need it. That would be very helpful. Detective Chen handed Patricia a business card. We may need to speak with you again, as this investigation continues. In the meantime, if you think of anything else, please contact us immediately. After Patricia left, Detective Chen came to the observation room. So now we know the car was deliberately hidden using a stolen identity, she said. This is looking less like a tragic accident and more like something intentional. But who would do that? Daniel asked. And why? Those are the questions we need to answer. The identity theft report from Portland might give us a lead, and we are still analyzing that notebook. If it really is a surveillance log, it could tell us who Margaret and Josh were watching, or who was watching them. When will you know about the handwriting analysis? The lab is working on it now. We should have preliminary results by tomorrow. Daniel drove home in a daze. Every new piece of information seemed to deepen the mystery, rather than solve it. Margaret and Josh had not simply driven off the road or had an accident. Someone had taken their car and hidden it using a stolen identity. Someone who had planned ahead. Someone who knew what they were doing. That night, Daniel could not sleep at all. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing through possibilities. Had Margaret been involved in something dangerous? Had she witnessed something she should not have? The surveillance log suggested she had been watching someone. But why? And who? He thought back to the months before Margaret disappeared, searching his memory for any unusual behavior or comments. She had been her normal self, loving, attentive, focused on her teaching and Josh's activities. There had been no late-night phone calls, no mysterious meetings, no changes in routine. Nothing that would suggest she was involved in anything out of the ordinary, unless she had hidden it from him. That thought was almost more painful than the disappearance itself. Had Margaret been keeping secrets? Had there been a whole side of her life he knew nothing about? His phone buzzed with a text message at 3 a.m. It was from Detective Chen. The handwriting analysis is complete. The notebook entries were written by Margaret. We need to talk. Can you come to the office at 9? Daniel replied immediately that he would be there. He spent the remaining hours before dawn sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee, and trying to make sense of everything. Margaret had been conducting some kind of surveillance. She had kept detailed logs. And then she and Josh had vanished. And someone had hidden their car using a stolen identity. The pieces did not add up to anything coherent. Not yet. But Daniel had a terrible feeling that when they finally did, the truth would be worse than anything he had imagined. At exactly 9 o'clock, Daniel walked into Detective Chen's office. She looked tired, like she had not slept much either. On her desk were several evidence bags containing the notebook and the handwriting samples Daniel had provided. The handwriting is definitely Margaret's, Detective Chen confirmed, which means she wrote these surveillance logs herself. We have been going through the entries trying to make sense of them. Would you be willing to look at them and see if anything stands out to you? Of course. Detective Chen opened the notebook carefully, its pages encased in plastic protective sleeves. The entries began in August of 2004, about 3 months before Margaret and Josh disappeared. Each entry included a date, time, and location, followed by detailed observations. August 15, 2004, 6:15 p.m., Highway 20 near Sisters. Gray Dodge Ram pickup, license plate Charlie Sierra Kilo 327. Driver matches previous description. Followed target west for approximately 12 miles. Lost visual near Mackenzie Pass. August 22, 2004. 7:30 a.m. Mackenzie Bridge Store. Target vehicle parked outside. Male subject, approximately 55 years old, 6 feet tall, heavy build, gray beard. Exited store with coffee and newspaper. Appeared to be alone. Did not notice observation. The entries continued in this vein for weeks. Margaret had been following someone, documenting their movements with the precision of a professional investigator. But there were no names. The subject was only ever referred to as target or male subject. "Do you have any idea who she might have been watching?" Detective Chen asked. Daniel shook his head, bewildered. "I have no idea. She never mentioned anything like this to me. I did not even know she was making these trips out to Highway 20. Did Margaret have any background in law enforcement or investigation?" "No. She was a teacher. Before that, she got her degree in elementary education. There was nothing in her background that would explain this." Detective Torres entered the office carrying a large file folder. "We got the identity theft report from Portland," he said. "And it gets weirder. The person who tried to open the credit card in Patricia Lawson's name was caught on security camera footage at the bank. He slid a grainy black-and-white photograph across the desk. Male subject, approximately 55 years old, heavy build, gray beard." Daniel felt the room tilt. "That matches the description in Margaret's notebook." "Exactly." Detective Torres tapped the photograph. "We ran the image through facial recognition, but did not get a hit. Whoever this guy is, he is not in any criminal database. So Margaret was watching the same person who stole Patricia Lawson's identity," Detective Chen said slowly, piecing it together. "And that person later used that stolen identity to hide Margaret's car. This was not random. This was planned." "But why?" Daniel asked, his voice rising. "Why would Margaret be following this person? And why would he come after her?" Detective Chen looked at him steadily. "Mr. Wilson, I think it is time we consider the possibility that Margaret was not the victim of an opportunistic crime. I think she was investigating something. And I think whoever she was investigating found out about it. The implications hung in the air like a weight. If Margaret had been deliberately targeted, if she had been killed because of something she knew or something she was investigating, then Josh had been collateral damage. An innocent child who had died simply because he was with his mother at the wrong time. "We need to figure out what Margaret was investigating," Detective Torres said. "There has to be a reason she was following this guy. Some connection we are missing." "What about her computer?" Daniel asked suddenly. "Did you ever check her email or search history?" "We did. Back in 2004. There was nothing suspicious. Just normal emails to other teachers and family members. Online shopping. Searches related to Josh's homework and her lesson plans. What about a second computer or phone? Something she might have kept separate? Not that we found. But it is possible she had something we did not know about. Did she have any secret email accounts or phone numbers you were aware of?" "No. But clearly there was a lot I was not aware of." Detective Chen made a note. "We will reach out to her family and close friends again. See if anyone knew what she was working on. In the meantime, we are going to focus on identifying the male subject in these surveillance logs. Someone has to know who he is." Over the next 2 weeks, the investigation intensified. Detectives interviewed Margaret's friends, family members, and colleagues. They reviewed her employment records and financial documents. They checked with local libraries and internet cafes to see if she had used any public computers. They showed the photograph of the bearded man to dozens of people in Bend and along Highway 20. No one recognized him. It was as if Margaret had been investigating a ghost. Someone who existed but left no traceable footprint. The frustration was palpable. Every lead seemed to evaporate upon examination. Every promising connection turned out to be a dead end. Daniel spent those 2 weeks in a state of constant anxiety. He could not eat. He could not sleep more than a few hours at a time. He existed on coffee and nervous energy, waiting for the phone to ring with news. Any news. Then, on a Tuesday morning in early December, Detective Chen called with a break in the case. "Mr. Wilson, we found something. Can you come to the office right away?" Daniel was there in 15 minutes. Detective Chen met him at the entrance and led him directly to a conference room where several other investigators had gathered. On a large screen at the front of the room was a photograph of a man. The same man from the bank security footage, but this image was clearer, more recent. "We got a hit," Detective Chen explained, "not from facial recognition, but from good old-fashioned detective work. We showed the photograph to every business along Highway 20, between Sisters and Eugene. A cashier at a gas station in Mackenzie Bridge recognized him, said he used to come in regularly about 15 to 20 years ago. Did she know his name? She did not. But she remembered that he always paid cash and drove a gray Dodge pickup. She also remembered that he worked for a logging company up near Blue River. We started contacting logging companies that operated in that area in the early 2000s, and we finally got a name." Detective Torres clicked to the next slide. A driver's license photograph appeared. Robert Talbot. Age 71 now, 63 at the time of Margaret and Josh's disappearance. Worked for Cascade Timber from 1998 until 2005. Lived in a cabin about 15 miles east of Blue River. Daniel stared at the photograph. The face meant nothing to him. Do you know where he is now? That is the problem. Detective Chen's expression was grim. Robert Talbot disappeared in December of 2004, about 3 weeks after Margaret and Josh vanished. He stopped showing up for work. His employer went to his cabin and found it completely cleaned out. No furniture, no personal belongings, nothing. It was like he had never been there. He ran, Daniel said. He knew Margaret was watching him, so he took her and Josh, hid the car, and then disappeared. That is our working theory. But we still do not know why Margaret was investigating him in the first place. We have been digging into Talbot's background. No criminal record, no history of violence, just a logger who kept to himself. What about the timber company? Daniel asked. Maybe someone there knows something. We are interviewing everyone who worked with him. So far, most people barely remember him. He was a quiet guy. Did his job, did not socialize much. One co-worker remembered that Talbot had a side business fixing up old cars, which might explain how he knew about salvage and storage. Another investigator spoke up from the back of the room. We did find one interesting thing. In 2003, about a year before the disappearance, there was a hit-and-run accident on Highway 20 near Mackenzie Bridge. A teenage girl was killed. The vehicle was never found, but witnesses described a gray pickup truck leaving the scene at high speed. Daniel felt his blood run cold. Margaret was investigating a hit and run? It is a possibility, Detective Chen said carefully. If Margaret somehow connected Robert Talbot to that accident, if she was gathering evidence against him, that would give him a powerful motive to silence her. But how would Margaret have made that connection? Daniel asked. She was not a police officer or a private investigator. How would she even know about it? That is what we are trying to figure out. Did Margaret have any connection to the victim of that hit and run? Any reason to be personally invested in solving it? What was the victim's name? Detective Torres checked his notes. Kayla Henderson, 17 years old. She was a senior at Sisters High School. Daniel searched his memory but came up blank. I do not recognize the name, but I can ask Margaret's family if they knew her. We are already doing that. We are also pulling all the police reports and witness statements from the original hit-and-run investigation. If there is a connection between Margaret and that case, we will find it. Over the next several days, the pieces began to fall into place. Investigators discovered that Kayla Henderson had been a student-teacher's aide in Margaret's classroom during her junior year of high school. The two had stayed in touch after Kayla graduated and moved on to senior year. They exchanged emails occasionally, friendly check-ins about how Kayla was doing in school and what her college plans were. Then, in September of 2003, Kayla was struck and killed while walking along the shoulder of Highway 20. She had been returning from a friend's house. The driver did not stop. No one was ever charged with the crime. Margaret attended Kayla's funeral. According to other teachers who were there, she was devastated by the loss. Kayla had been a bright, promising student with her whole life ahead of her. The fact that her killer had never been caught ate at Margaret. What no one knew was that Margaret had decided to do something about it. She began her own investigation, working quietly and methodically. She reviewed the police reports using connections she had made through parent-teacher conferences with a family who worked in law enforcement. She interviewed witnesses herself, asking questions under the guise of keeping Kayla's memory alive. She spent weekends driving Highway 20, looking for gray pickup trucks that matched the witness descriptions, and eventually, she found Robert Talbot. The surveillance logs in her notebook told the story. She had followed him for months, documenting his movements, noting his routines, looking for any evidence that would connect him to the hit and run. She had seen him working on vehicles at his cabin. She had observed him driving routes that took him past the location where Kayla had been killed. She had been building a case, piece by piece, determined to get justice for a girl who had touched her life. But Margaret had made a critical mistake. She had not been as careful as she thought. At some point, Robert Talbot had noticed her watching him, and he had begun planning. The identity theft of Patricia Lawson had happened in early 2004, months before Margaret and Josh disappeared. Talbot had been laying groundwork, creating a false identity he could use if he needed to hide something. Like a car belonging to someone who was asking too many questions. Detective Chen shared all of this information with Daniel in a series of conversations over the course of a week. Each revelation was another piece of the puzzle falling into place, and each one made the tragedy more comprehensible, but no less painful. "So he killed them," Daniel said finally. It was not a question. Talbot killed Margaret and Josh to stop her investigation. We believe so, yes. We may never know exactly what happened that day. But based on the evidence, we think Talbot intercepted them somewhere along Highway 20 on their drive home from Bend. He may have forced them off the road or used some pretext to get them to stop. Then he took them somewhere. And Margaret and Josh were never seen again. And the car? He drove it to the storage facility in Bend, used Patricia Lawson's stolen identity to rent a space, and left it there knowing it would eventually be auctioned off and disappear into the salvage system. It was actually a clever plan. If we had not gotten lucky with the license plate database match, we might never have found it. What about their bodies? Daniel's voice broke on the word. Where are Margaret and Josh? That is what we are working on now. We have search teams going over every property Talbot owned or had access to. We are looking at logging sites where he worked. We are searching the forest areas near his cabin. It is a massive undertaking, Mr. Wilson. The terrain is rugged and heavily wooded. But we are not giving up. And Talbot, where is he? That is the other piece we are pursuing aggressively. We have issued a nationwide warrant for his arrest. We have alerted the FBI. His photograph is being circulated to law enforcement agencies across the country. We are checking border crossings, passport records, everything. If Robert Talbot is alive, we will find him. If he is alive, Daniel repeated, you think he might be dead? It is possible. He would be 71 years old now. He could have died at any point in the last 16 years. Or he could have assumed a new identity and be living somewhere under a different name. We are exploring all possibilities. Daniel left the sheriff's office that day feeling both lighter and heavier than he had in years. Lighter because he finally had answers. He knew what had happened to Margaret and Josh, at least in broad strokes. He knew why they had been taken. He knew who was responsible. The not knowing had been its own special torment, and now that torment was over. But he also felt heavier because the answers brought no real closure. Margaret and Josh were still gone. Their bodies had not been recovered. Robert Talbot had not been caught. Justice remained elusive. And the knowledge that Margaret had been killed because she tried to do the right thing, because she sought justice for a student she cared about, made the tragedy even more bitter. The story broke nationally a few days later. Margaret and Josh Wilson's disappearance had been a local news item for years, but now it became a major story. A teacher investigating a hit and run. A mother and son vanishing while seeking justice. A killer who had escaped for 16 years. The media could not get enough of it. Daniel found himself besieged by interview requests from television shows, podcasts, newspapers, and magazines. He declined most of them, but he agreed to speak with a few outlets that he felt would tell the story respectfully. He wanted people to know about Margaret's courage. He wanted people to understand that she had not been a random victim, but someone who had stood up against injustice. He wanted Kayla Henderson's name to be remembered alongside Margaret and Josh's. And he wanted Robert Talbot to know that the world was looking for him. The publicity brought in tips, hundreds of them. People who thought they might have seen Talbot. People who remembered him from years ago. People who had theories about where he might be hiding. Detective Chen and her team followed up on every credible lead, but weeks passed without a breakthrough. Then, in late December, almost 2 months after the Honda Accord had been found at the salvage yard, a detective in Spokane, Washington, contacted the Lane County Sheriff's Office. They had a body. A homeless man had died of exposure in an abandoned building. When they processed his belongings and fingerprints, they got a hit. Robert Talbot. He had been living on the streets of Spokane for at least 5 years, according to people at the local shelter. He had gone by the name Robert Thompson. He had kept to himself, never caused trouble, and rarely talked about his past. He had died alone, possibly of hypothermia combined with pneumonia, sometime in mid-December. Detective Chen called Daniel with the news. "I know this is not the ending we wanted," she said. "We wanted to arrest him, prosecute him, make him face what he did. But at least we know he cannot hurt anyone else. And his death might actually help us." How? When Talbot died, he had a storage unit key in his pocket. We tracked it to a facility in Spokane. We executed a search warrant this morning. Mr. Wilson, we found Margaret's laptop. Daniel's breath caught. Does it work? Can you access it? Our forensics team is working on it now. The battery is long dead, and there may be some water damage, but they are optimistic they can recover data from the hard drive. If Margaret kept any additional documentation of her investigation, if she had notes or evidence we have not seen, it might be on that computer. How long before you know? A few days, maybe a week. These things take time. But Mr. Wilson, I want to prepare you. Even if we recover everything from the computer, Even if we learn every detail of what Margaret discovered about Talbot, we still may never find where he took her and Josh. Talbot took that secret to his grave. I understand, Daniel said quietly, but anything helps. Any piece of information brings me closer to them. The forensics team worked through the Christmas holiday, determined to extract every possible byte of data from Margaret's laptop. Daniel waited, as he had been waiting for 16 years. But this time, the waiting felt different. This time, he knew it would end. On December 30th, Detective Chen called him to the sheriff's office. When Daniel arrived, she was standing in the conference room with a thick folder and a flash drive. "We recovered nearly everything from Margaret's hard drive," she said. "Her emails, her documents, her search history. And Mr. Wilson, we found something that changes the equation significantly." What? Margaret did not just suspect Robert Talbot of the hit and run. She had proof. She had traced the gray paint found on Kayla Henderson's clothing to a specific type of paint used on 1998 Dodge Ram pickups. She had obtained a photograph of Talbot's truck showing body damage consistent with hitting a pedestrian. She had even found a witness who saw Talbot's truck on Highway 20 the night Kayla died, though the witness had never come forward to police. Margaret had built a complete case. She had everything she needed to bring to the authorities. In fact, according to her emails, she had an appointment scheduled with the Oregon State Police for November 20th, 2004, 6 days after she disappeared. She was going to turn him in, Daniel said, and he found out. We think he may have been monitoring her emails somehow. We found evidence of spyware on her computer. Talbot was not sophisticated, but he knew enough to install basic surveillance software. He saw the email confirming her appointment with the state police. He knew he was about to be exposed. So he acted. That is premeditated murder. Yes, it is. Which brings me to the other piece of news. We believe we know where Margaret and Josh are. Daniel felt his knees weaken. He sat down heavily in one of the conference room chairs. Where? In Margaret's documents, we found a list of locations she had surveilled, places Talbot frequented or owned. One of them was an old logging site about 20 miles east of Blue River. It had been closed since 2003, but Talbot still had access to it because he had worked there for years. Margaret noted in her documents that she saw Talbot visiting the site multiple times, even though there was no active logging happening there. You think he buried them there? We have ground-penetrating radar equipment and cadaver dogs going to the site tomorrow morning. Mr. Wilson, I do not want to give you false hope. It has been 16 years. The elements and wildlife could have scattered remains. We might find nothing. But if Margaret's notes are accurate, this is our best chance. I want to be there. Detective Chen hesitated. That is not standard protocol. I do not care about protocol. Those are my wife and son. If you find them, I need to be there. She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. All right, but you will have to stay back from the search area. And if we do find remains, you will not be able to approach until after the forensics team has finished their work. It could take days. I understand. The search began at dawn on December 31st. Daniel stood at the perimeter of the old logging site, watching as teams of investigators and search dogs moved methodically across the terrain. The site was heavily overgrown now, nature reclaiming what humans had temporarily taken. Trees that had been saplings 16 years ago were now 20 feet tall. Underbrush covered old roads and equipment pads. The dogs worked in a grid pattern, their handlers carefully noting each location where the animals showed interest. Ground-penetrating radar teams followed, scanning beneath the surface for anomalies. It was painstaking, methodical work. Hours passed with no significant findings. Then, around 2 in the afternoon, one of the cadaver dogs alerted near the edge of the site. In an area that would have been easy to access with a truck 16 years ago, but was now choked with vegetation. The handler called out, and the search teams converged on the location. Detective Chen approached Daniel at the perimeter. "We have something," she said quietly. "The dogs have indicated human remains. We are going to begin excavation now. This could take a while." Daniel nodded, unable to speak. He watched as technicians set up a tent over the area and began the careful process of excavation. Hours crawled by. The winter sun moved across the sky, shadows lengthening. Daniel stood in the same spot, refusing to leave, barely aware of the cold. As darkness fell, portable lights were set up around the tent. More personnel arrived, including a forensic anthropologist from the state crime lab. Daniel could see figures moving inside the tent, could hear low conversations, but could not make out any details. Finally, at nearly 9 o'clock, Detective Chen emerged from the tent and walked to where Daniel stood. Her face was somber, but not without compassion. "Mr. Wilson, we have recovered skeletal remains of 2 individuals. Based on preliminary examination, 1 adult female and 1 juvenile male. We will need to do DNA testing for positive identification, but the location, the condition of the remains, and some personal effects we found are all consistent with this being Margaret and Josh." Daniel felt tears streaming down his face, hot against his cold cheeks. "How did they die?" "The forensic anthropologist will need to do a full examination, but there are clear signs of trauma to both skulls. They were killed quickly. They would not have suffered long. It was small comfort, but comfort nonetheless." "Thank you," Daniel managed to say. "Thank you for not giving up on them." "They are being treated with dignity and respect," Detective Chen assured him. "The remains will be transported to the medical examiner's office tonight. We should have DNA confirmation within a few days, and then we can release them to you for burial." After 16 years, Margaret and Josh were coming home. The DNA results confirmed what everyone already knew. The remains found at the old logging site were Margaret and Josh Wilson. The forensic examination revealed that both had died from blunt force trauma to the head, likely inflicted with something like a tire iron or a heavy piece of wood. The evidence suggested they had been killed elsewhere and then transported to the logging site for burial. It had been quick, brutal, and tragically efficient. Robert Talbot, in his paranoia about being exposed, had committed murder. Then he had spent 16 years running from his crime, eventually dying alone and homeless in a city far from where he had once lived. Justice had caught up to him in the end, though not in the way anyone had hoped. On a cold January morning, Daniel Wilson buried his wife and son. The funeral was held at Willow Creek Presbyterian Church, the same church where he and Margaret had been married 20 years earlier. Hundreds of people attended. Teachers from Margaret's school, parents of Josh's classmates, friends and family members. Members of the community who had never met the Wilsons but were moved by their story. Detective Chen and several of her colleagues attended in uniform, standing at attention during the service. Bill Hendricks from the salvage yard came, hat in hand, still feeling somehow responsible even though he had been the one to alert authorities to the car's presence. Even Patricia Lawson attended, the woman whose stolen identity had been used to hide the car, wanting to pay her respects to the family affected by the crime that had touched her life. Daniel gave a eulogy, his voice steady despite his grief. He spoke about Margaret's dedication to her students, her courage in seeking justice for Kayla Henderson, her love for Josh and for teaching. He spoke about Josh's infectious laugh, his passion for soccer, his kindness to other kids at school. He spoke about the 16 years of not knowing, of living in limbo, and how finally having answers, while painful, was also a gift. And he thanked the investigators who had never given up, who had followed every lead, pursued every possibility, and finally brought his family home. After the service, Daniel returned to his house alone. But it felt different now, less haunted. The ghosts had been laid to rest. Margaret and Josh were no longer missing. They were no longer lost in some unknowable void. They were at peace in the cemetery at the edge of town, their names carved in granite, their memory preserved. In the weeks that followed, Daniel began the slow process of rebuilding his life. He sorted through Margaret and Josh's belongings, keeping some items and donating others. He finally allowed himself to change things in the house. To paint rooms different colors, to rearrange furniture, to move forward. He established a scholarship fund in Margaret and Josh's names at Willow Creek Elementary, awarded annually to a student who demonstrated both academic excellence and a commitment to helping others. He worked with Detective Chen to create a presentation about Margaret's investigation for law enforcement training purposes, showing how ordinary citizens can make a difference when they see injustice. And he finally, after 16 years, allowed himself to grieve properly. Not the suspended grief of not knowing, but the full, heavy grief of loss. He cried for the life Margaret and Josh never got to live, for the birthdays and holidays they never celebrated, for the future that had been stolen from them by one man's cowardice and violence. But he also celebrated their memory. He shared stories about them with anyone who would listen. He made sure that Kayla Henderson's name was remembered too, the teenager whose death had set this tragedy in motion. He advocated for better reporting systems for hit-and-run accidents, working with legislators to create a database that would make it easier to track down fleeing drivers. 6 months after the funeral, on what would have been Josh's 27th birthday, Daniel returned to the old logging site where the remains had been found. It was spring now, and the forest was alive with new growth. Flowers bloomed in the clearing. Birds sang in the trees. Life continued, as it always did, even in places touched by death. Daniel stood in the spot where Margaret and Josh had been buried for 16 years. He did not pray, because he had never been particularly religious, but he spoke to them anyway, telling them about the scholarship fund, about the presentation for police, about the changes he was making to the house. He told them that he was going to be okay, that he was going to live the kind of life they would want him to live, full and purposeful, and focused on making things better for others. And then he said goodbye. Not the goodbye of someone who would never speak of them again, but the goodbye of someone who was finally able to move forward while carrying their memory with him. As Daniel drove home from the logging site that day, he passed through Mackenzie Bridge. On impulse, he stopped at the small memorial that had been erected for Kayla Henderson along Highway 20. Someone, probably her family, still maintained it. Fresh flowers sat in a vase attached to a white cross. A photograph of Kayla smiled from beneath a protective plastic cover. Daniel added his own flowers to the memorial. White roses, Margaret's favorite. And he stood there for a few minutes, thinking about the chain of events that had connected all these lives. Kayla's death, Margaret's investigation, Josh's innocent presence on that final drive, Robert Talbot's crimes and his eventual lonely death, Patricia Lawson's stolen identity, Bill Hendricks finding the car just before it would have been crushed forever. So many moments, so many choices, so many what-ifs. If Talbot had not been driving that night in 2003, Kayla would still be alive. If Margaret had not been so devoted to her students, she might not have investigated. If she had been more careful, Talbot might not have noticed her surveillance. If she had gone to the police sooner, before scheduling that appointment, she might have had protection. If Daniel had insisted on going to the soccer tournament that weekend instead of working, he might have been there to protect his family. But there was no value in those thoughts. They led nowhere except to madness. What had happened had happened. All that remained was to honor the memory of those lost and to live in a way that gave their deaths meaning. So Daniel Wilson did exactly that. He lived, he loved, he worked for justice. He helped others who had missing loved ones, sharing what he had learned about navigating the terrible limbo of not knowing. He spoke at conferences about cold cases and the importance of never giving up. He became an advocate and an activist, channeling his grief into purpose. And every November 14th, on the anniversary of the day Margaret and Josh disappeared, he visited their graves. He brought flowers and soccer balls and yellow sundresses made of fabric. He sat and talked to them about his year, about the changes in the world, about the kids who had won the scholarship in their names. He made sure they knew they were not forgotten. He made sure their story continued to be told. Because that, in the end, was all he could do. Keep their memory alive. Keep seeking justice for others, still waiting for answers. Keep pushing forward even when it hurt. 16 years of questions had finally been answered. The silver Honda Accord had been found. The surveillance logs had been deciphered. The killer had been identified. Margaret and Josh had been brought home. It was not the ending anyone had wanted, but it was closure. And sometimes, closure was enough. This has been Cold Crime Case, bringing you the stories of those lost but never forgotten. If you've stayed with us through this entire journey, thank you for caring about Margaret and Josh Wilson's story. Thank you for believing that every victim deserves justice and every family deserves answers. If this case has moved you, if you believe in the importance of keeping cold cases in the public eye, then I need you to do something right now. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Smash that like button to help this story reach more people. Share this video with anyone who cares about true crime and justice. Leave a comment below telling us what you think about Margaret's courage in investigating Kayla Henderson's death. Or share your own thoughts about how ordinary people can make a difference when they see injustice. And if you or someone you know has information about any unsolved case, any missing person, any hit and run or unexplained disappearance, do not stay silent. Contact your local law enforcement. Submit tips to Crime Stoppers. Speak up. Because as Margaret Wilson proved, ordinary citizens can change everything. One person asking questions, following leads, refusing to let an injustice go unanswered can break a case wide open. Margaret Wilson was a teacher who loved her students so much that she spent months investigating the death of one of them. She built a case against a killer that would have brought him to justice if she had just had a few more days. Josh Wilson was a 10-year-old boy who loved soccer and had his whole life ahead of him. They deserved better than what happened to them, but their story has meaning now. Their deaths have led to scholarships, to advocacy, to change. Kayla Henderson was a 17-year-old girl with dreams and plans and people who loved her. She deserved justice, and Margaret Wilson tried to get it for her, even though it cost Margaret everything. Robert Talbot was a coward who killed a teenager in a hit-and-run, and then, rather than face the consequences, killed 2 more innocent people to cover up his crime. He died alone and homeless, haunted by what he had done. That is not the justice we wanted, but it is the justice he got. Remember these names: Margaret Wilson, Josh Wilson, Kayla Henderson, they matter. Their stories matter. And by watching, by caring, by sharing, you are keeping their memories alive. This is Frozen Evidence Files, where we never forget the victims, we never stop seeking justice, and we never give up hope that even the coldest cases can be solved. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring. And please, keep these stories alive by subscribing, liking, and sharing. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay compassionate, and never stop fighting for those who can no longer fight for themselves.